It's really common as a financial advisor for me to talk to people about saving, about investing, about budgeting. But one of my favorite topics to bring up with clients is giving, and not just giving generally, but how they can, as part of their financial plan, they can optimize their charitable giving. And one of the things I've noticed is that by and large, people are generous. They've got causes that they already support, they've got things that they'd like to do. And by applying some strategy and by applying some creativity to their giving and matching that with the right sets of tools, it can actually amplify their generosity, which has a huge impact on others and can be one of the most fun things that we can do with money. In this video, I'm going to talk about a type of account that most of my clients haven't heard about called a donor advised fund that previously wealthy families primarily used in order to create sort of a low cost mini charitable foundation, but is actually accessible really to anyone, regardless of your level of wealth or your level of generosity, that can help you make your giving more systematic, more strategic, and help you follow through with what you want to do to give. So with that, let's jump right into how donor advised funds can help maximize your charitable giving. I'm just going to talk about a few things today. The first one is the importance of giving as part of a financial plan. The second one is how a donor advised fund works. Then I'll walk through 3 smart DAF, donor advised fund, giving strategies, ranging from something basic that anybody who does recurring or annual charitable giving can do, to some more complex strategies that can lead to greater tax savings and more impact for charity over time. And I'll finish with a few next steps. So let's start with why we should be focusing on giving. I think it's natural as you think about your finances to try to optimize. And I'm very type A. I love to optimize my savings rate, my investment returns. But a handful of years ago, I noticed that even though I would say that generosity is a core value of mine, that I wasn't applying the same level of strategy to my giving. And I looked at it and I thought, wow, I actually find giving quite rewarding, but how could I take this a step further, being more strategic? And here's why I think everyone should really ask themselves those questions and look for answers. First of all, this kind of goes without saying, but there are countless causes that need our support. I actually worked at a church for the first 4 years of my career, and we had so many ministries where people needed help. And they range from the hyper local, like a food pantry that we had on our campus, even in the wealthy suburb that I lived in, we were feeding hundreds of families every single month. The very global, building wells for clean water in Cambodia and supporting orphanages overseas. And I got to have these awesome opportunities to go out and see how far dollars can go to bless and benefit others. And I always looked at it and was just stunned at how meaningful it was, but also looking at it and being like, wow, there's just so much need and I want to be a part of helping. So regardless of the cause that you want to support, there is probably a cause that needs your support. The second reason we should focus on this is because I have this belief that you are rich, that you're blessed, and that you're actually able to help. And I'm saying that because if you're watching this, it's probably on high-speed internet in maybe an air-conditioned space. And if you're here in the same country that I'm in the United States, by and large, you likely are among the top 5%, maybe the top 1% in global wealth. Now, we don't always feel that way, right? It's easy to compare ourselves to other people and to not have a narrative that I'm rich, that I'm blessed, that I'm able to help. But if objectively that's true, and if you make $40,000 or more, even with purchasing power parity across the whole world, you're in the top 1% of income earners worldwide. If you don't think that is true because you're always looking at somebody else who's richer, that's going to influence the way you think about all of your money, all of your financial decisions. And so here's the reality. If you have a narrative which is, I'm not rich, I could have more, I'm not really blessed, I'm not actually in a position to be able to help, then you're not going to do that. But if you could reframe that narrative to say, actually, I'm well off, I've got more than enough, and I'm able to help, one of the best ways that you can actually live into that new identity related to your money is by giving away money, whether it's a small amount or a large amount. When I give someone $20, when I buy them lunch, when I give to charity, I'm living into that identity, and nothing makes me personally feel how I actually am, which is rich, than being generous. It turns out consuming more does not make me feel rich, but actually giving more does. The third reason to focus on giving is that there's a lot of research that backs up the benefits of giving. There's a book called Happy Money where Harvard researchers, they looked at the 5 things that we should do with money to actually increase and elevate our joy. And they found that giving to others actually creates a lot more personal fulfillment than spending on ourselves. Dave Ramsey has a quote. He says, "Giving is the most fun you can have with money." And at first I thought he was crazy, but some of the most memorable things I've done with money are gifts, again, large or small, to help others. And you just have to do it to try it. The fourth reason to focus on giving is that when we're strategic with our generosity, it can maximize the impact, right? So when we see a need and we're actually able to be strategic, it maximizes the impact. And the opposite of that, when we're not strategic, right? When it's just last minute, it almost never comes across the way that we want it to. We don't find it as fulfilling. The organizations don't benefit as much. And so we want to be strategic here in the way that so many of my clients are strategic in every other area of their finances. And fifth and finally, when we plan our giving in advance, setting an annual giving goal, communicating what we're going to give to charities, it can unlock additional benefits both for you and for the organization. Specifically, I'll talk about some tax benefits today, but those benefits are manifold, and you can find them when you do this. So hopefully this persuades you that this is worth focusing on. And I'll do other videos about how you can get started in giving, but today I want to talk about, if we're going to focus on giving, how we can use donor-advised funds to do that. And in order to frame that up, I want to talk about 3 types of givers. These givers are sporadic givers, annual givers, and regular givers. And this table, I'm not going to go through every bit of it, but this is just a framing that I've seen with people that, first of all, I want to start by saying that every one of these givers, whether it's sporadic, annual, or monthly, or more frequent givers, you're generous. And I think if you have the heart and the desire to give, it makes you a generous person. Now, what a lot of people don't have, and where you would range on this spectrum from sporadic to regular, would be the follow through. And so here's what I've noticed is that regular givers, by and large, they're giving at least monthly, and often to fewer causes, but with a greater depth of support. They feel really connected to their gifts because they're intentional with the level of giving, and it means that they actually follow through because their giving is a high priority. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got sporadic givers where when they have an opportunity, they'll give. They're probably going to support a bunch of causes because they're more reactive than proactive with their giving. It's going to be low dollar amounts, and they're naturally then going to feel less connected to their gift. It's not as intentional. They might even actually want to help a specific charity, but may not follow through because ultimately this just hasn't risen to the level of priority that makes it really important to them. I think if everything I previously said about giving is true, then we should make it our goal to move from being sporadic givers more towards being regular givers, regardless of the amount financially that we're giving. That's really up to you how much you want to give. And so if we're going to do that, my belief is if we're going to become regular givers, the best way to do it with any part of our finances, if we have any goal we want to pursue, is we want to create a system that supports that goal. So James Clear has an incredible book, and you must read it if you have not, Atomic Habits. And in it, he talks about behavior change using the atomic level of habits as this very important place where behavior change starts. And he talks about this from a view that we don't rise to the level of our goals, those big picture things. We actually fall to the level of our systems. And so if we have a big goal that we want to pursue, the best way to get there is to break it down into tiny, manageable steps that are very easy to pursue, or atomic habits. What I've found in financial planning that's even better than a lot of these habits is the power of automation and using systems to make sure that that baseline of what we really want to do, what our values are, actually gets observed in the way that we manage our finances. And this is where a donor-advised fund is so powerful. And so let's get into it. In the rest of the video, I'm going to talk about donor-advised funds. how they work, and strategies to use them. And so to make it very basic and give you a comparison, in traditional giving, how it works is we're going to look at the example of Sarah through the rest of this video. Sarah has some money. She gives it to a few different charities. She gives it to a hospital, she gives it to a church, and she gives it to her alma mater. When she gives to them, whether it's monthly or annually or irregularly, they give her tax receipts. She includes them in her tax return, traditional giving. And traditional giving works. You can keep doing that. But I want to introduce a donor advised fund as a way to maybe enhance your giving strategy. In DAF giving, what Sarah does is she gives from stocks, bonds, mutual funds, cash, real estate, any of these different vehicles to a separate account called a donor advised fund. And functionally, it's a lot like you pushing money into an investment account or putting it into a bank account. You just do a transfer or a credit card payment, or you move some stock in there. It's just a financial account that's going to receive money from one place. And then a donor advised fund is actually managed by a 501c3. So when you give it there, you've given money to a charity. And then you, as the donor, advise the fund to give the money that's inside of there to other 501c3 charities. Once it's in there, it can only go to charity. And so what Sarah would do is if she's giving to those institutions $10,000 a year, instead of giving to each one separately, she'd give all the money to her DAF. And then from the DAF, she would make grants out to the various charities, which has a handful of core benefits. So here are 5 benefits, and there's more than this, but at a high level, I would say that these 5 benefits are core to using a DAF. First, easy administration, right? You can do automatic giving, you can contribute monthly, and from an admin standpoint, you're only going to get one tax receipt because when you give to your donor advised fund, that's a charity, and that's actually the charity you're giving to, and then they're just distributing to other eligible charities throughout the year or years. The second benefit of giving through a DAF is you can make non-cash gifts. So if you wanted to give stock or mutual funds or cryptocurrency or even other more esoteric assets, you can gift those to the donor advised fund, which can liquidate those holdings and then just easily give cash out to charities. The third one is flexible timing. So you get an immediate tax deduction when you give because the donor advised fund is managed by a charity. So you can give maybe a large amount at year end and then distribute that gift over a few years, which can have some significant tax benefits that I'll cover at the end of the video. The fourth benefit is if there is a gap between when you give to your donor advised fund and when you give to charity, you can invest the funds in the meantime, which can maximize the amount that you give to charity over time. And the fifth benefit is to the extent you want anonymity in giving, when you give to the donor advised fund and then you distribute those gifts, you grant them to other charities, you get to decide how much information is disclosed to the charities that are receiving your gifts. So I hope this helps you see some of the benefits of a donor advised fund, why you might set up this account and use it for giving. But let's talk about 3 examples to give you a sense of scenarios and solutions that I've seen donor advised funds be really effective for. And so in the first one, we're going to talk about how a donor advised fund can streamline administration of giving. So in this scenario, Sarah gives $10,000 each year to 5+ charities. So cumulatively $10,000 of gifts. She gives monthly gifts of $500 to her church, $40 to sponsor a child through Compassion International, annual gifts of $1,000 to CASA, support young at-risk teens, $500 in a golf tournament, and then miscellaneous gifts sporadically as requested. So there's kind of a lot going on. And with all of that going on, sometimes it's difficult for her to keep track of how much she's given or how to give to a specific charity. And so instead of doing it that way, how she historically has, the solution is Sarah sets up a donor advised fund. It takes her a few minutes. And she decides she's going to route all of her giving through that donor advised fund and then to the charities. This is going to streamline her giving. It's going to help her be more intentional. She starts scheduling recurring gifts so she never forgets. And all of the charities that she gives to are saved on her dashboard. So when she wants to make a gift at year end or throughout the year, it's just a click of a button to support that charity that she really cares about. And so here's the comparison between her current setup and giving through a donor advised fund. In her current setup, she gets at least 5 tax receipts, and sometimes she loses them, so she may not get the full tax benefit. By giving through the DAF, she's got easy records of all of her giving on one tax receipt. She also saves on fees because in her current setup, she often gives via credit card and it costs a few percent for these gifts and she covers that. So she's paying $200 in credit card fees that's not going to charity, it's going to the credit card companies. But through her donor advised fund, she gives via ACH through her bank account, and so she doesn't pay any of those fees. She's got a lot of websites to navigate in her current setup, but through the donor advised fund, there's just one simple website that she looks through. And ultimately, it saves her a lot of headache at tax time, right? It's a lot of headache currently, and it becomes minimum headache now. She's not waiting around for a tax receipt from a charity to see how much she gave. She can just access it online through her portal. It's as easy as accessing a bank statement. Now, let's say Sarah wanted to be even a little more strategic. She's been giving cash for years and years, but she met with her financial advisor, and as they were looking at the constellation of all of her goals, they noticed that she gives $10,000 each year to charity, but she's also got this brokerage account. It's a taxable account, it's not a retirement account, and there's $100,000 worth of Apple stock that she bought back in 2014 for $20,000. So there's $80,000 of gains in this stock. She's beginning to be nervous about it as a portion of her portfolio, and she really wants to diversify, but she doesn't know what the tax impact of selling that stock would be. And so the recommendation or solution for her is, instead of gifting from cash to charity, which is what she's previously done, is just treated it like a monthly bill, instead, she gives $10,000 of this appreciated Apple stock directly from her brokerage investment account to the donor advised fund. So the shares get sent from that account to the donor advised fund. Then the donor advised fund receives it. They're a charitable institution. They sell it, and she gets a tax deduction for the full value of the $10,000 gift. Because she didn't sell the shares, she doesn't have to pay taxes on any of the gains. And now she has that extra cash, around $800 a month, that's available, and so she uses that to diversify her investments. So she's able to, in this scenario, when we compare it, before she was always gifting cash and thinking about selling stock. If she gifts the cash, of course, she's going to get her $10,000 tax deduction. But if she sells the stock, she's going to have $8,000 of capital gains on her stock sale. And so if she's paying state tax of 10% and federal tax of 15%, she's going to pay 25% tax on those capital gains, which is $2,000. And ultimately what that means is that $10,000 of stock that she sold, she only has $8,000 left to diversify afterwards. If instead she gifts the stock, she gets that $10,000 deduction for the full value of the stock, which was bought over a year ago. Very important that we give these long-term shares. And then she doesn't have to pay any capital gains. So as a result, that $10,000, which previously she gave via cash to charity, she can now use to diversify her portfolio. So this is powerful, right? Non-cash giving is very powerful, and I've seen that it really unlocks more generosity among clients, that they want to give, but maybe they're cash strapped. Being able to do these non-cash gifts, it's pretty painless to do, to execute, and it can create a win-win for everyone. Now, the third solution here is taking it to a whole nother level, using the ability to bunch charitable giving through one tax year in order to maximize the benefit to an individual. And so here's the strategy. So Sarah, same situation. She gives $10,000 in cash every year to charity. Now, the standard deduction in 2024 is $14,600. And in reviewing her tax return, they found that in the previous year, she got a $16,000 deduction for state and local taxes and that $10,000 of charitable giving. So you can think of it as the first $10,000 of her giving, that's a deduction, and then she's got $6,000 of other miscellaneous deductions. Here's the big deal. If her deductions are under 14,600, well, she's going to take the standard deduction from a tax standpoint. Because she's over, even by only $1,400, she itemizes every single year. But same situation holds. She has $100,000 worth of Apple stock. She bought it in 2014, and she wants to diversify. In conversation with her advisor, they realize that over the next handful of years, she's going to give at least $40,000 to charity. And so as a solution, what they decide to do is to actually gift the next 4 years of charitable giving at year end to the donor advised fund. So that would be $40,000 of Apple stock that gets given to the DAF. And then once the money is in the donor advised fund, her plan is to continue giving $10,000 per year as distributions from that account to charity. And they're actually going to invest that $40,000 in the donor advised fund with the hope that it might grow to be $45,000 or more, so that actually more gets to go to charity over time. Then what Sarah decides to do is use the cash that would have been gifted in those later years to diversify her investments. Basically use cash flow to do this. So what's the benefit of structuring giving this way? Well, what you can see in this first column is that in her current giving strategy, she would be giving $10,000 a year. Her current deduction is going to be around $16,000 a year, all else being equal. So over those 4 years, her tax deductions on her tax returns would be $64,000. Pretty good, but not as powerful. What ends up happening if she does the bunched giving is she does a gift to her donor advised fund of $40,000 of Apple stock in 1 year, in 2025. That generates a deduction in that year of $40,000. Then, in these following years, she ends up not giving to charity from her cash flow. She's giving from the donor advised fund. So she's still giving $10,000 a year, but all of the deduction gets bunched up in that first year of 2025. Then what ends up happening in the bunch deduction scenario is she ends up getting a $40,000 deduction in 2025, which generates significant tax savings. And then in the following years, she's just going to take the standard deduction, which is $14,600. So as a result, in this bunched giving scenario, she gets to diversify more stock sooner, potentially give more to charity, get a greater tax deduction to the tune of tax deductions of $85,000 over 4 years in this bunched giving scenario versus $64,000 in 4 years. So an additional $21,000 of tax deductions. If she's in the 24% marginal tax bracket, right, and is paying around 10% in state tax, this could be a savings of $7,000 to $8,000 in taxes over these years. And she didn't give any more or less. She just gave more strategically. This is what's so powerful about doing this. And remember, I didn't even talk about the fact that in giving the $40,000 of Apple stock instead of selling it, she was able to gift $40,000 worth of shares that she bought for a fraction of that and not have to pay any taxes on the sale of those shares because they were gifted to charity. So those are the three strategies: streamlining giving, gifting non-cash, and doing bunched charitable gifts. And I hope they just paint a picture for you of why you might want to have one of these accounts. Now, just finishing with my own situation, my wife and I have a donor advised fund. And right now we do a little bit of non-cash giving, but mostly we just use it for that first reason, to keep things streamlined. And I found that it's made it much easier for us to create a giving plan and to stick to a giving plan. What I recommend you do as a next step coming out of this is look into donor advised funds. If you look at Vanguard, Schwab, or Fidelity, if you've already got accounts at one of those, they all have a charitable arm that allows you to do this sort of charitable giving. There's two pretty big players that are startups that have beautiful user interfaces and allow you to do this, called CharityVest and Daffy. You could check those out as well. And then there are some large foundations, NPT and Silicon Valley Community Foundation. You could look at those as well. If you're inspired to do more giving, you don't need to do it through a donor advised fund. But what I would recommend is that you treat this part of your finances with the same amount of strategy and intention that you do with every other part of your finances. And talk to your advisor about how you might be able to execute some of these strategies to enhance your giving. In the next video, I'm going to walk through a demonstration of a charity vest account to show you what that looks like. That's what I use with clients primarily for running their charitable giving. And hopefully that will just give you another view into how these accounts work. I hope that this has inspired you to think critically about giving, that it empowers generosity, and as a result, that it changes the lives of others, but it also changes your own life, your own view of yourself, that you would recognize every day that you are rich, that you are blessed, and that you are able to help, and you would live it out with your generosity. Thanks for watching.